What if the future we imagined had vanished, only to be found decades later in the dust of forgotten archives? Across vaults, attics, and abandoned cinemas, reels once thought destroyed have re-emerged to rewrite the history of science fiction. These aren't remakes or reboots, they're resurrections. From silent era experiments to Cold War fantasies, each of these films escaped extinction, to remind us just how visionary the genre always was. Let's rewind time and rediscover 12 lost sci-fi worlds that refuse to stay buried. Number 12. La Planète Sauvage, The Wild Planet, 1973. Surreal, strange, and once almost lost to time. When La Planète Sauvage premiered in 1973, audiences had never seen anything like it. This French-Czechoslovak animated masterpiece by René Laloux told of a distant world where giant blue beings, the Drogs, keep tiny humans as pets. Beneath its psychedelic visuals lay a fierce allegory about freedom and oppression, imagination and intellect. It was science fiction told like a fever dream. But its journey through history was turbulent. Political turmoil in Eastern Europe nearly destroyed the studio that made it. Original negatives went missing after the film's limited theatrical run, and many prints were heavily censored or re-edited for different markets. For decades, versions floated around faded incomplete and dubbed beyond recognition. Fans called it a ghost film, appearing in fragments and memories. Then, in the early 2000s, archivists located a near-complete French negative in a forgotten storage vault in Prague. The restoration uncovered colors and textures unseen since the 70s hand-painted dreamscapes that shimmered like watercolor hallucinations. Re-released in high definition, La Planète Sauvage reasserted its place among the boldest animated films ever made. Rediscovering the Wild Planet proved that imagination never fades. It just waits for technology and curiosity to catch up. Number 11. Algol, The Tragedy of Power, 1920. Before superheroes or dystopias, there was Algol, a silent German film that imagined a world powered by a cosmic machine. Released in 1920, it told of a humble worker who gains control of alien energy, beamed from a distant star, and uses it to dominate the Earth. Think of it as a century-old warning about technology and temptation. The sets were towering, geometric, and unreal, a glimpse of early expressionist sci-fi that would later inspire Metropolis. But after the 1920s, Algol all but disappeared. Silent films decayed quickly, and by the post-war years, archivists believed it was gone forever. For generations, it survived only through still photos and reviews, describing it as the film that electrified itself to death. Then in 1995, a complete nitrate print was discovered in the Danish Film Institute. Restoration experts painstakingly rebuilt the film frame by fragile frame, revealing intricate lighting effects that looked futuristic even by modern standards. When the restored version finally premiered, audiences were stunned by how contemporary its ideas felt, a story about humanity worshipping its own technology. Algol isn't just a rediscovered movie, it's proof that sci-fi's obsession with power and consequence was already burning bright more than a century ago. Number 10. Metropolis, 1927. For decades, Metropolis was cinema's greatest incomplete dream. Directed by Fritz Lang, this silent German epic envisioned a colossal city where workers toiled underground while the wealthy lived in skyscrapers above. Machines ran everything. Humanity was just a gear in the system. When it premiered in 1927, critics were divided but fascinated. The studio panicked over its length 2.5 hours and slashed almost a quarter of it before releasing the international version. Those missing reels vanished into rumor. For 80 years, film scholars tried to reconstruct Metropolis from scrap stills and guesswork. Then, in 2008, the impossible happened. Archivists in Buenos Aires discovered a 16mm print containing nearly all the missing footage. Though scratched and faded, it restored the film's lost soul characters, subplots, and emotional weight that changed everything about how audiences understood it. The newly restored version premiered in Berlin 2 years later to standing ovations. Rediscovering Metropolis was like finding the last chapter of a sacred text. It didn't just complete a movie, it completed the origin story of science fiction on film. Number 9. Deluge, 1933. Before CGI and disaster blockbusters, Deluge drowned the world using miniature models and pure imagination. Directed by Felix Feist, this American pre-code thriller depicted a series of natural catastrophes that submerged New York City under roaring water. It was one of Hollywood's first large-scale end-of-the-world scenarios. Then it vanished. For nearly 50 years, Deluge was thought lost, its negatives missing, and no prints known to survive. Scholars believed only a few still photographs remained. Some even thought the film's ambitious destruction scenes were cannibalized for later features. In 1981, an Italian collector discovered a surviving print dubbed in Italian in a forgotten archive. Decades later, the original English soundtrack was miraculously found in France. Restoration teams combined both sources, finally reviving the original Deluge in pristine quality. When modern audiences saw it, they were stunned. The miniature effects rivaled anything from later decades, and its pacing felt shockingly modern. The rediscovery rewrote history. Before The Day After Tomorrow, before 2012, there was Deluge, the little film that literally invented destruction cinema. It took half a century for Deluge to resurface, but when it did, it washed away the myth that spectacle began with computers. Sometimes the greatest effects come from human hands and bold ideas. Number 8, The Lost World, 1925. Long before Jurassic Park roared onto screens, The Lost World brought dinosaurs to life. Directed by Harry O. Hoyt and based on Arthur Conan Doyle's novel, it told of explorers discovering a hidden plateau where prehistoric creatures still roam. Using stop-motion animation by Willis O'Brien, the same genius who later created King Kong, it stunned audiences of the silent era. But film stock in those days was fragile, easily burned, easily forgotten. Over time, reels of The Lost World were scattered, damaged, and in many cases destroyed. For most of the 20th century, only shortened versions survived. The full adventure was thought to be extinct. That changed in the early 2000s when a combination of prints from archives in Czechoslovakia, the United States, and the United Kingdom were merged to create the most complete edition ever seen. Restoration revealed scenes unseen for 80 years, like extended dinosaur battles and a more emotional finale. The Lost World lived up to its name, then defied it, rediscovered and restored it, roared back from extinction, just like the creatures it portrayed. Number 7. Radio Free Albemuth, 1985. Before Blade Runner turned Philip K. Dick's paranoia into neon spectacle, this another adaptation of his vision quietly vanished from history. Radio Free Albemuth was shot in the mid-'80s as a bold, independent attempt to visualize Dick's own mystical experiences. A story about a record store clerk who begins receiving transmissions from a mysterious alien intelligence named Valis. It was ambitious, strange, and decades ahead of its time. But after only a handful of private screenings, legal disputes over music rights and distribution rights buried the film. Master tapes were locked away, and most people assumed the project had been scrapped entirely. For years, it existed only as a rumor whispered in fan circles, the lost Philip K. Dick film that no one had ever seen. Then, in 2006, a forgotten 35mm work print surfaced in a Los Angeles warehouse during a studio liquidation. Archivists pieced together the damaged reels, syncing them with an old cassette of the director's cut. When it finally screened for the first time in 25 years, audiences were stunned. Its DIY production shimmered with sincerity, handmade optical effects, haunting analog synths, and an unfiltered critique of surveillance culture that felt eerily prophetic. Radio Free Albemuth isn't polished, but that's its power. It's the lost heartbeat of 1980s sci-fi. Raw, visionary, and unafraid to question who's really sending the signal. Rediscovered decades later, it reminds us that sometimes the strangest frequencies take the longest to be heard. Number 6. The Island of the Lost, 1921. Imagine a silent-era science fiction film that vanished into the ether only to re-emerge decades later from a dusty vault. The Island of the Lost told of a remote island, human-animal hybrids, and experimental science gone awry, a daring cinematic leap for 1921, blending sci-fi and horror elements in one strange package. When it premiered, it caught attention for its wild sets and hybrid creatures, human-animal experiments, strange experiments off the coast of civilization masquerading under the guise of an adventurous horror film. But soon, the film disappeared. For decades, it was listed as lost. No known print, few references, only stills and trade advertisements. The notion of advanced sci-fi elements in such an early film made it all the more tantalizing. Then, in the early 2010s, a print turned up in the archives at Germany's National Film Repository, the Bundesarchiv. Buried under a different label, misfiled for years, the film emerged and a restoration was mounted. Viewers of the revived version were struck by how inventive the production was. Sets that suggested alien research labs, weird creature designs, and an island that seemed less remote seafront and more entry to another world. The Island of the Lost proves that even when a film disappears, ideas don't vanish, they wait. Rediscovery rewrote a small corner of sci-fi history and reminded us that the genre's roots run deeper than we might assume. Number 5. Roy dell'Spazio, Roy of Space, 1983. This one's a modern myth come true. Roy dell'Spazio was a Mexican animated film about a boy who becomes an interstellar traveler after discovering a mysterious spacecraft. Produced on a shoestring budget, it was celebrated at its limited premiere in 1983, then vanished almost overnight. For years, fans searched for any trace. The studio closed, the film negatives were presumed destroyed in a warehouse flood, and all that remained were a few production stills and posters. Collectors dubbed it Mexico's Lost Star Wars. Then in 2019, a partially damaged film reel surfaced in a private collection in Guadalajara. Experts identified it as Roy dell'Spazio. Restoration work began immediately. What they uncovered wasn't a blockbuster, it was something even rarer, a handmade cosmic odyssey filled with color, heart, and sincerity. Animation historians were astonished by its craftsmanship. Without modern tools, the artists had created fluid motion, painted galaxies, and space battles that felt deeply personal. After restoration, the film screened at the Morelia International Film Festival to thunderous applause. Roy dell'Spazio reminds us that science fiction doesn't belong only to Hollywood. It belongs to dreamers everywhere, even those working in basements, with crayons, imagination, and belief in the stars. Number 4. Unknown World, 1951. What happens when you dig too deep literally? Unknown World was one of those early 50s sci-fi adventures that mixed hope, fear, and geology. Directed by Terry Morse, it told the story of scientists drilling beneath the Earth's crust to find a refuge from nuclear destruction. When it premiered in 1951, critics mocked it for its grim tone and minimalist effects. But beneath its modest production, Unknown World carried something powerful, an apocalyptic realism that would inspire films like The Core decades later. Unfortunately, like many low-budget features, the negatives were poorly stored. Television prints vanished, and by the 70s, it was considered lost. In the early 2000s, a complete 35mm print was discovered in a vault at the Library of Congress. The restoration revealed crisp black and white cinematography and surprisingly sharp sound design. More importantly, the rediscovery showed how Unknown World captured the atomic age anxiety of its time, fear of collapse, but also faith in human survival. Unknown World might not have had monsters or flashy lasers, but it dug into something deeper, the human instinct to survive ourselves. Rediscovered decades later, it feels eerily timely again. Number 3. The Glitter Ball, 1977. Before E.T. phoned home, a shiny metal sphere beat him to it. The Glitter Ball, a British family sci-fi from 1977, told the story of two boys who discover a mischievous alien orb hiding in a warehouse. Made for the Children's Film Foundation, it mixed humor, adventure, and genuine wonder in just an hour's runtime. But because it was a small educational film, it disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Broadcast rights expired, prints were misplaced, and for decades the movie existed only in school memories and rumors. Some fans even believed it was a false memory, a Mandela Effect movie that never existed. That changed in 2010 when the Edinburgh Film Festival unearthed a surviving 16mm print. Digitally restored, the film dazzled a new generation with its charm and ingenuity. Audiences marveled at how much emotion and personality the filmmakers got from a bouncing ball and a few sound effects. The glitter ball is living proof that science fiction doesn't need big budgets, it just needs heart. Lost for years, it returned to remind everyone that curiosity and kindness can be as powerful as any laser beam. Number 2. The First Men in the Moon, 1919. Before Ray Harryhausen's beloved version in the 60s, there was an earlier nearly forgotten adaptation of H.G. Wells' novel, The First Men in the Moon. Made in Britain in 1919, it was one of cinema's first attempts to visualize space travel with practical effects. Sadly, it didn't survive long. The original nitrate negatives deteriorated during storage and no known prints remained. For nearly a century, this early version existed only in production. Stills and written accounts describing its groundbreaking moonsets and insectoid selenites. Then, a thrilling discovery. In 2019, film historians found fragments of The First Men in the Moon at the British Film Institute's vaults mislabeled among newsreels. Though incomplete, these short sequences provided the first moving images of the film seen since its release. Plans for full restoration are ongoing, but even those recovered minutes prove monumental evidence that sci-fi imagination was alive and thriving before sound ever entered the scene. The First Men in the Moon reminds us that the early dreamers of cinema were already aiming for the stars, and sometimes all it takes is a few rediscovered frames to bring their vision back to life. Number 1. A Trip to Mars, 1918. Denmark. Before rockets, before NASA, and long before CGI, Danish filmmakers already dreamed of space travel, and A Trip to Mars proved it. Released in 1918, it's often called the world's first feature-length science fiction movie about interplanetary flight. The film followed an explorer who launches himself to Mars using ray propulsion, where he finds a peaceful utopian civilization, untouched by war or greed. For decades, it was a phantom of film history. Nitrate decay and wartime loss meant that by the 1940s, A Trip to Mars existed only in partial reels. Film historians mourned it as the first true space epic and a tragic casualty of time. Then, in 1969, archivists at the Danish Film Museum discovered a nearly complete nitrate print mislabeled among travel documentaries. Painstaking restoration revealed an astonishingly modern vision, delicate hand-tinting imaginative Martian cities and themes of pacifism and ecological harmony decades ahead of their time. When it re-premiered in Copenhagen, critics called it the grandfather of all utopian sci-fi. Today, A Trip to Mars stands as a rediscovered testament to human optimism, proof that even a century ago, filmmakers were already dreaming about saving humanity through science not destroying it. Some films predict the future, others create it. A Trip to Mars did both and then came back from oblivion to remind us how long we've been reaching for the stars. From buried vaults to distant archives, these rediscovered films prove that imagination never truly dies. It just waits for the right hands to find it again. Each reel resurrected isn't just a piece of cinema. It's a time capsule of human curiosity daring to dream beyond its century. So, which of these forgotten visions would you queue up first if you could? Drop your answer below, hit like and subscribe for more journeys through the lost frontiers of science fiction.